Welcome to the Edozo Property Podcast, bringing you insight and inspiration from thought leaders in commercial property and technology. We hope you enjoy the show.
Stephen Fear is a British entrepreneur, businessman, philanthropist, and author with 50 years international business experience. Today, he has an established property empire and interest in a number of industries, including green technology, hotels, residential care, and manufacturing. Stephen is chairman and founder of Fear Group, an international organization he runs with his son, Leon Fear. Fear Group has interest in strategic land promotion, international property development, and investment. Stephen also has multiple philanthropic interests and is patron of Lucy Air Ambulance, who deliver air transfers for seriously ill children in the UK. Welcome to the Edozo Podcast, Stephen.
Oh, thank you, James.
So, Steve, before we dive in, could you explain to our audience what the Fear Group does?
Yeah, I'm asked that question quite often, so it's an easy one to answer. Our core business, our primary business, is involved in property. We consider any other interest we have as additions to our core business. They're not our core business. My core business, since I was about 19, has been in property. Prior to that, I started manufacturing cleaning fluids in the UK when I was younger than that, and then I went on into property after then. But since I was about 20, which is a while ago now, my main interest has been in the property business, and basically we are involved in land promotion, but we also buy. We try to buy rather than take options where we possibly can. So we will buy strategic sites, and then we'll sit on them. I've always taken a 30-year view on everything I do. So nothing I do is necessarily going to be for tomorrow. So I don't suppose you could call my business model a cash flow model, because we're always spending money on buying new projects. But nonetheless, our prime interest is within the land and also speculatively buying property, primarily around the UK, but not only in the UK. We used to be far more active in the States than we are in the US than we are now, but we are active in Georgia, in the Caucasus, where we have and are hoping to expand mining interests. So specifically copper mining interests. So, it's a fairly broad sort of brush. We don't build out ourselves as we used to. Generally, when we buy property, whether it's land or whether it's buildings, whatever, we then work up a planning position which is advantageous, which makes the best use of the site. And then we always involve a constructor who's far, far, far better at building than we ever would be. So we tend to put the deals together, buy the land, buy the properties, and then bring in a qualified constructor that really knows what they're talking about as a main contractor, and or sometimes and often as a partner.
Okay, and your UK interests, are those predominantly southwest focused, or do you look across the UK?
We focus on England primarily because since the evolution and the sort of I never quite know what Mark Drakeford's going to do in Wales or Mrs. Sturgeon's going to do in Scotland. So, and Northern Ireland, I'm flummoxed by. So, because of that, we tend to focus mainly on England. Having said that, we've got interests in South Wales, and we have an awful lot of Welsh friends. We don't have any interest in Scotland at the moment, and we don't intend to acquire any in the near future. I go to Scotland frequently, and I've got relatives that live in Scotland, so they'll hate me saying that, but it isn't anything against Scotland. It just so happens it's the way it is. So primarily England, but going over into Wales on occasion. But that can be anywhere in England. One day I'm down in Plymouth, next day I'm up in Cumbria. So it's, I even now I spend quite a lot of time on the road.
On the road.
Yeah. I work mainly on my car is my office. I've got to have a day car because I do so many miles in it. I've got to throw them away every year or two. I just run up so many miles. But I've always been like that. I was just going to say, I think the thing in property is you can do as much as you like on the web. You can do all the Googling you want to do. But without networking and without looking at the sites physically, for me anyway, the internet's brilliant. It's a great tool, but that's all it is. It isn't the be all and end all. And we get calls now these days from people, and they've dug up something on the internet that we've already. The mainstay of our business is that I established a research centre, getting on for 40 years ago now. I started it, where I always thought that what I needed to do was know what was going on within whatever business I was in. And so I put together a sort of a mini research centre. It was originally based in Cardiff, but these days we've got it based in the Cotswolds partly, and I've got a researcher based in Stamford in Connecticut. And what they do is they look for global hotspots. So, for instance, when we got into mining in Georgia, when we started looking at mining, not just in Georgia, but when we started looking at mining and that came about because of we realized maybe 8-9 years ago that the world would run short of copper unless copper mining was expanded. They say, I quite know who they are, but they say that the world will run short of copper by about 2030, 2031, unless more is dug out of the ground and processed. And of course, it's a long-winded business,
Sure.
Mining is a long-winded business. 40-year licenses are the norm. You get a 40-year license from a government for extraction license, and then you have to get on with it. So it isn't a quick business. Again, it's not a cash flow model. I wouldn't recommend it for someone that's looking for a cash flow model, because it's very, very expensive to get into.
It sounds like you're out of the trading days of property and into the long-term strategic vision days.
No, I've always had a long-term approach to property and anything else I do, even friendships. When I start a new friendship, I look upon it as lasting at least 30 years. In other words, a lifetime, really. So I start on that basis. And by starting on that basis, I always think you can build and establish connections that hold you in good stead when times are difficult as well as when times are good. I've got people working with me today that worked with me when I was 15. So wow. I first came into business slightly before my 15th birthday because I never went to school. So that was the way it was. So I do look upon long term, but I buy with a long term view, but with the intention of getting out as soon as I can. So if I can buy today and sell tomorrow, I'll do it. Property doesn't always work like that. We try to make some of it work like that to keep cash flow going, because every time, especially with Leon being in the business, he's 30 years younger than me, obviously, and he's extremely active. And he's coming in and saying, I've just got another 2 deals, Dad. We need 7 million. And I think, hang on, that's on top of the 16 million we had yesterday. And how far do it goes on. And that's property. Anybody watching this podcast in property will understand those problems. Doesn't matter. Lord Hanson once said to me, sadly he's dead now, but Lord Hanson once said to me, it doesn't matter how much money you have, Steve. It doesn't matter how much money. You'll never have enough to buy everything you want because there will always be more things to buy. So, and it's true. It's true. Opportunities come in at a horrific rate to us.
And where do you get them from, Steve? Do you get introductions from agents? Is it your personal network or?
Well, our research centre throws up opportunities Tony Pidgely. I had lunch with Tony Pidgely going back. Sadly, another one that's passed on. And Tony's
legend in the industry.
Oh, an absolute legend. An absolute legend. Yeah. My mother and father were divorced when I was 4, and my mother went to live in a rented caravan in a small Wiltshire town called Malmesbury, and we lived in the caravan for about 5 or 6 years, and my bedroom was a cupboard it wasn't a form of abuse before I get anyone coming on saying, oh, we'll take it. There's nothing like that. My mum was great. It was just that we didn't have any space, so I had to sleep somewhere. So I slept in the cupboard, and it was great. But the point I'm making, because of that, Tony said to me, "Oh, you were brought up in a caravan by the side of the road." I said, "No, I was brought up in a caravan by the side of the river, the River Avon by the Duke of York down in Malmesbury." But but I was chatting with Tony, and he said, "I'll do you want to sell that research?" We were talking about our research office, and he said, "Do you want to buy that research? Do you want to sell your research office?" And I said, "I don't know. Have you got enough money?" And he said, "I got plenty of money." I said, "Well, I'll look at 500 million as a down deposit." And we just laughed. But the reason for it is it throws up so much opportunity for us on a daily basis, because we have people dedicated. We've got two people who look after the technical side on computers, and are doing the technical side research on the web and all sorts of things, looking into everything. And then we have a print reader, and all she does is read print, nothing at all. She's dyslexic. She doesn't touch anything. She only can focus on one thing, and she doesn't. But she picks every nuance out of a page of print, and that's just the way she is. So we now have that. So we have two different. So this information is then fed into us, and there it's processed, and we look at and forecast what might happen next. So copper came into that when we started looking at mining, primarily because a Ford Focus, a typical Ford Focus, and I dare say somebody will email me after this and say I was a meter out on the wiring, but as I understand it, a Ford Focus takes around about a Ford Focus internal combustion Ford Focus takes about 37 meters of wiring in its loom to make the car effective. An electric version takes 67 meters. So you can see there's a doubling up. And so when you consider the electrification of everything, and then we've got robotics and we've got everything else, that's going on globally, and you've got China gobbling up all the copper and everything that's going, and so we look at taking opportunities. So I said to Leon at the time, well, someone said, "Why don't you buy shares?" Well, I hate buying shares because someone else is in control. I mean, I've got some chief executive that's running a company, and I don't know whether he's going to be any good at it or not if I buy shares. So I'd rather trust in myself. Some people might say that might be a mistake, but I try. So we don't really invest in the stock market as such. We're not passive investors; we're active investors. So I said to Leon, someone said, "Why don't you buy some copper shares?" I thought, I've got shares in, but I said, "I'll buy mine with copper in it."
It's a property in a way as well. It's a piece of land with a big mine on it.
In our case, it's a couple of mountains, but yeah. But so there you go. And so that's how we did that. So but when I started it. I got into property when I was about 19 or 20 because I built an industrial cleaning business. I started it when I was just under 15, and we worked it through, and it became quite successful. And I sold it when I was 19. And then I thought, what am I going to do now? I don't know what I'm going to do. And I read somewhere that property was a thing to get into. All the millionaires, and there weren't billionaires then. A billionaire was something that we're now looking at trillionaires. But it seemed to me that property always played a part, no matter what. And so I got on a plane and went to the US and started to look at how they do things with property, to see how because they are very aggressive, the Americans. We're finding that out with Brexit talks. You don't just, with trade talks, Americans are very, very tough when it comes to negotiating. They've been running free enterprise since the beginning. So I went to the States and sort of chatted with a few people and got a couple of investors and on board, and we started looking. I started buying small houses in Bristol primarily initially, and then we expanded. And it just went. Someone else would ring me from a faraway place like Swindon, and I'd whip up the Swindon and buy a portfolio of something up there, and then Manchester, where I had a lot of contacts historically. And so it went on, and it was sort of, it was by accident, really, because I just did, and I still do. I did, and I do exactly what I want to do when I get up. Sometimes I feel like going to work, and sometimes I don't. And I was exactly the same when I was younger. It's just that then, mostly every day I woke up, I felt like going to work, and I mostly still do. Mostly still do.
And Steve, do you use outside capital as well, or do you have investors? You mentioned going to the US and getting investors. Do you have, do you take in money from funds or private investors? How does your
good question. Very good question as to the way we operate. We don't have any bank borrowing. We don't borrow from the banks. I learned many years ago that banks. Sorry to all my banking friends, and I've got many at Lloyd's and NatWest and Handelsbanken and Royal Bank of Scotland. So I mention you all, Coots, all of you. But we don't use bank funding because I've always found bankers are wonderful with the umbrella when the sun's out and not so good when the rain comes round. So we don't tend to use bank funding. We use internal funds from our own self-generated businesses, or we work with select number of what we call family and friends. These are people that come into our family and friends network. We don't work with funds. We don't borrow from funds as such because we're not very corporate. We're not very, it's just not the way we are. I only work with people I like. I only do things with people I like. If I don't like them, if I don't like them initially, I don't do it, however much money's in it, because you can do a deal with the devil, but you don't want to go to work with the devil every day. So if I wanted to go and buy a car, I could probably buy it from the devil, but would I want to own a garage with the devil? No. So property tends to be long term. So if you don't work with who you like, do I want to get up every day and go and see people I don't want to be with? No. So I don't do it, and I never really have done it. I've got friends and colleagues going back, like I say, right to when I was 15, that are still working with us to this day. And we've got a select group that we call family and friends. And that does get added to. People do approach us. I've had an approach this week from someone in Germany who's a friend of a friend and said, look, have you got any deals that we can come in on? And I said, we've always got deals that someone can come in on, but with the greatest respect, we don't know each other yet. I mean, get on a plane and come over to London and, let's see if we like the look of each other. And then we'll see what fits. And then if it does, we might then co-invest, we might not, but we work with people that will go on, and they're usually ultra high net worth individuals rather than corporations, sometimes companies, but usually ultra high net worth individuals that happen to be friends of ours. Fortunately, we've got quite a few.
Yeah. And Steve, I'm really interested on your, just to touch on your research side again. So, at Edozo, we provide digital mapping and data for property research. So, which includes stuff like land registry, title information. Does your research team leverage technology in terms of searching for land, searching for owners, or are they more on the sort of macro side, searching for sort of demographic trends across the UK? And I know you're involved in care homes, for example.
Yeah.
So do they leverage technology or is it more just in-depth demographic research and that sort of macro research?
No, it's primarily in-depth demographic research to see what opportunities are coming up, and then they will sometimes and we have the ability to do it, do some research and ownership searches and things like that if we need to. But someone like your business could be very useful to us. Our own research center, we do not sell information to anyone. Everything we have, everything that comes into us and is only used by us and any investors that are involved with us. No one else. No one has access to it. It's extremely private. No, I don't want to use the word secretive because it isn't secretive, but it's not published and we don't sell it. So, we look and see whether we can use it and, to see, where it's going to go. I mean, for instance, the predictability, it always amazes me, the predictability as to where we are now. And this isn't about Brexit. Just say that in case
Sure.
politics and all the rest of it. It's nothing. It's not really about Brexit. It's about what I consider facts. The fact was, as soon as the country voted for Brexit, there was going to be a short-term issue for the UK in adjusting to something, coming out of something where they've been a club member for 43 years and they weren't yet members of another club, because no man or woman is an island. We like to think we are, but we're no one. We've got to trade with other people. So to me, there was always going to be a short-term issue, particularly I thought at the time for property. I thought we would end up with shortages. And in fact, I predicted it when I spoke at Cardiff University going back, that we would see shortages, fuel, food. These things were bound to happen anyway, for various reasons. We predicted the shortage of HGV lorry drivers across Europe 5 years ago because there weren't enough drivers coming in. And so it was obvious that now you might say, would we then not have invested in an HGV driving school? We would if we bought shares in public companies, but we don't. And I don't want to be bothered creating such an entity, so we never did it. We looked at it and thought we could set up, because we knew it would happen, and it has happened. So I sometimes get calls from both government and private people saying, "What do you think about this?" for an opinion. But that's all it is an opinion. We don't give them access to private information. It was predictable. And I always said the problem with Brexit, and I voted to remain, but it was a selfish reason I voted to remain, because I spend most of my time between the UK and the south of France, or did until COVID raised its ugly head. And so I wanted to be able to access the south of France whenever I wanted to access it. I still will be able to, because we got into, I can go back and forth, but it isn't as easy. I take my dog everywhere with me. I rarely fly. And because I take my dog everywhere with me, he sits in the back of the car and we just go to France. Not a problem. And I was protective of my lifestyle. That's why. And I thought, and everyone was saying this is going to be terrible for young people. Well, in actual fact, I think that Brexit could be very good for the young people of the UK, but not for 15 years. And on the basis I'm now in my late 60s, I'm looking at it and thinking to myself, I don't want to wait till I'm in my early 80s for it all to come round again. So, but having said all that, James, there are enormous opportunities, not just because of Brexit, but the world is in dire straits leadership-wise. I mean, we've got a lack of leadership across the spectrum, political parties and all sorts. So, and that, property is so important and fundamental to the prosperity globally that we do need proper and good firm leadership, which I don't think that we've got anywhere, particularly at the moment. So there you are.
And where do you see the biggest opportunities in the UK sort of property sector? What are you focused on any specific sector? You don't have to give away any of your trade secrets from your research.
I won't.
No. but where are you seeing the most activity?
Well, I think there's huge opportunities in distribution at the moment, and also last mile distribution, where the step down from heavy trucking and rail down to delivery vans. I think there's clearly opportunities still there. We're very actively looking. If any of your audience happen to be architects, and I'm sure that many are.
We have plenty, yeah.
And planning consultants, or agents, whatever. We are always actively looking to buy potential distribution sites across England and Wales, but the UK, even internationally. We will look at distribution sites in Europe too, because it isn't just here. This shortage of lorry drivers at the moment isn't just a British thing. There are 46,000 short in Germany. Wow. I had a friend of mine from Germany ring me just the other day and said, I don't know why you Brits keep on about all this problem with drivers. We've got exactly the same problem. So, before people get carried away about it, that's just the way it is. And I think there's 17,000 short in France. There's a lot of drivers that are short. But outside of that, yes, distribution, last mile distribution, Clearly, technology. I'm convinced. I know the big announcement about the potential for Elon Musk going to Bridgewater, which is down the road from here.
The gigafactories. That's a very interesting.
Gigafactory, but very interesting. But I'm convinced there's going to be another gigafactory, and I'm not going to say where I think it might be, but I think there will be another gigafactory. So there's opportunities in that. There's opportunities in EV charging, of course, across the UK, and tie-ups with cafe chains, like possibly, any of the big chains, Nero, Costa, Starbucks, whoever they are, could tie up with EV charging in there. You call in, you go and get charge your car or van or lorry, whip in and have a coffee, go on the internet. All these things are part and parcel of what we're doing. So I think there's great opportunities there. I mean, the supermarket expansion is quite outstanding, really. I mean, Lidl, Aldi, Marks and Spencer's Food, it seems just about anyone that can sell anybody anything in a supermarket are looking for more sites, and they tend to be looking for smaller sites than they were and building them to a higher quality than they did. I've been very surprised going around the supermarkets, doing my own research, at how good some of the modern supermarket interiors are. Air conditioned, cleaned. You're clean, spotlessly clean. They do look better than they used to be. So a lot of the supermarket chains are expanding, and so I think there's opportunities there. And we're looking for sites in all these areas. So, if anybody is watching this and have got anything, please give us a ring.
Give us a ring. Well, that's important, isn't it? I mean, how do people typically get in touch with you? Obviously, website's obvious start, but
go on our website, www.feargroup.com. Just look at feargroup.com. It tells you everything there. But I and Leon as well, we use the phone a lot. Of course, we all use emails, and we use, other means of communication and texts. But I mean, when you look at it all, text, WhatsApp, then someone direct tweets you, and then just ring me up. I mean, it
gets a bit distracting otherwise, doesn't it?
Yeah, and so I do use the phone a lot. I mean, people tend to email me, and I tend to ring them back because I can't. I'm in the car a lot, you see, and I always drive myself. I don't have a driver these days. And so I always drive. I used to have a driver for a long time, but I don't bother. I'd rather drive myself with sat nav and all the gizmos we've got now. I've got a co-driver. My dog's my co-driver, and so.
What type of dog do you have, Steve?
He's a Sprocker.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, he's a Springer Cocker cross.
So he comes and does your site viewings and all your business meetings too.
Yeah.
Great companion, that.
Everybody knows him, Alfie. He all my friends. In fact, my friend a friend of mine in Georgia, who was a previous ambassador to the UK and also to Japan and Australia, different things. He's another dog fan, and his first thing is, he said to me, I don't know. He said, this Boris, he said, you now have this Boris as Prime Minister. I said, yeah. He said, and this Starmer potential. I said, yeah. He said, forget it. Tell them Alfie must be Prime Minister. And I said, yeah, you're right. I said, he'd do as good a job as some of them. I'm not saying Boris or Keir Starmer, but he would do as good a job as some of them. Yeah.
And on the subject of leadership, have you had any mentors in property over the years? You mentioned Tony Pidgely earlier, and what have been some of the things you've learned from some of your mentors over the years?
Well, I've had a few, and I've met most of them over the years. Most of the, especially going back, and even now. I mean, I would say now. There was a guy called, no one will know him, none of your viewers will know him, but he was probably 70 when I was 20, when I first came into the property business, and he was a property developer, dealer, old school, very old school, and but he used to always give me things. He used to always say, he used to say things like, just remember, this isn't a cash flow business, and There's no situation improved by being broke, and things like that. And you sort of people like that over the years. I haven't had one solitary property entrepreneur because I've just always gone my own way. I largely avoid industry functions, and because I find what it is, for me, that's learning by rote. I mean, I don't mean any disrespect to any of the highly qualified surveyors at top agents like Savills, Knight Frank, Cushman's, anywhere, whoever all you guys are, because they're great, and obviously we need them, and that's great. But the trouble with having a mind which is trained in one direction is it tends to be in that groove. So everyone goes that way. So property is exactly like that. As soon as anything happens, all the sheep go where they're together. And so when they're over there, I tend to go the other way. And that causes me to be, sometimes you've got to just wait. And then because I'm not going in the same direction as all the sheep. So, golf courses were a good example. Going back in the 80s, everybody was golf course. You've got to do golf courses. You've got to do golf courses. Fantastic. And then we ended up with so many golf courses, nobody could sell them. And that was predictable. And I could see it happening. And I see the same potential to happen in some of the things that we're seeing now. But I do think globally, nationally and globally, there are exponential opportunities, because wherever you've got a market which has a troubled market, that was one of the things old Trevor Brown used to say to me. He used to say, you only make money in troubled situations. He said, you've got to look for where the problems are, and if you can solve those problems, that's where the money is. But you've got to solve those problems. So you've got to become a problem solver. And I think that is right, because the problem is the margins that one can make on any business transaction are governed by how many people are taking all the bits out of that transaction before you get to it. So the sooner you can get to an opportunity, those are in first or close first. Sometimes it's better just to test the water and let's see whether someone else makes it work and then jump in and do it better. I accept that. Disruptive opportunities, but seeing clear opportunities before the rest of the people see them is so important. And that's why I set the research centre up nearly 40 years ago, 38 years ago, I think it is, this year. And it originally, when I set it up, going back, it had 12 people in it, believe it or not. I sort of thought I got to take all these people on because, of course, in those days, and we had all the American newspapers, and they had to be physical copies in those days. Like now, I subscribe to USA Today, and it's on my iPad everywhere I go. If I open the iPad, I'm in the office. That's where I operate. I never go into the office. So if I open the iPad, I'm in the office. If the iPad's closed, I'm not in the office, but I am on the phone. So, this is one of the problems that we sort of had then. Was I used to use compass guides to research companies. The library, Bristol Library, actually used to sell me all their old compass guides that they finished with, but they were slightly out of date, but they did list lots of companies and they were very, very cheap because they're very expensive to buy. And in those days, I didn't want to spend the money, but I would buy them. But it was a lot of research. You'd have a whole great table. I used to have a refractory table that was 12 feet by 4 feet wide with all these books on it so that people would do their research. And we had the map of the world. I had a carpet made, which was a map of the world that was the carpet. And the reason was when people came into the office, I wanted them to feel they were in a research place, a place where we were doing research. And so that's why I did it. And but we had maps and we had stars on there. We still have, but now it's all online. But stars on the maps wherever we own properties, and then a different star color for where we see an opportunity. So when I put my screen up, I can think, right, black, shall we say? I haven't looked at that today. That was an opportunity that came in yesterday. What's that all about? Location, Peterborough. Why? What's the reason? Where are we? What are the distribution networks like? Is it a distribution site? Would it be good? Who's building there at the moment? What are the plans? What are the planning? What plans are there to build ongoing? Do we know of anyone that's milling around there at the moment looking? So all these sort of things have got to be gone into. And then when it comes down to it, I say to Leon the other day rang me, and I said, on a Sunday morning, it's 7:00. And I said, hello, mate, what are you up to? He said, I'm up in Colchester. I said, what are you doing up in Colchester? He said, I'm looking at a site, we've looked at Sunday morning. He got up at 4:00. He's in the car. He's in Colchester. We had it all on paper, well, on screen, but that wasn't enough. And I said, does it work? And he said, no. He said, it doesn't work. No, it won't work for what we wanted it for. And I said, why is that? And he said, I've looked at the accesses and stuff. And he said, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So I said, oh, fair enough. Ring me when you get to the breakfast place then. And we had a chat, and that's what we do. That's how we go on.
And Leon's your son. And what advice would you give to the younger generation of people coming into to property, or even just entrepreneurship in general? I know you were the entrepreneur in residence at the British Library, so you've probably seen lots of different. I'm not. Oh, you were? Okay. Yeah.
No, I was. Yeah, I did a 5 years. Well, I stayed 6 years actually. Simon Jack he was then on Radio 4 Today program, asked me, said, you're entrepreneur in residence. I said, well, I'm entrepreneur in residence, brackets sometimes, Simon. Yeah. Okay. I'm not there that often, but I do, but nonetheless, I was. Yeah. So I mean, part of my remit at the British Library was advising startups and young entrepreneurs on what they do. What advice would I give them? I would say only borrow when you need to. But the most important thing, borrow to make money. Never, ever borrow to improve your lifestyle. You improve your lifestyle with the money you make from the money you borrowed. That's the most important thing. Put your money into your business. Don't put your money into your mouth in restaurants and stuff unnecessarily. Having said that, I spent half my life. Someone said to me the other day, but it's a great life for you. You're always in cafes. I said, well, I can't have an office in every town in Britain, can I? So if I'm in Wigan and I don't have an office, I'm going to meet someone. If I don't go to a restaurant or a cafe, where do I meet them? If they're not from Wigan either. So, that's what I would say to young entrepreneurs. Try to conserve. The other thing I would say to them is, if you've got an idea which really works and you've researched it, whether in property or in any other industry, you will find the capital if you go and look for it. The world is awash with cash. It's absolutely awash with cash.
Thank you. I was going to say, I think you'd be forgiven for eating out in cafes. I think you've definitely earned the right to eat wherever you like at this stage. Maybe so the younger generation haven't quite yet done that and still eat in expensive restaurants. But given your background and so on, I think you've well and truly earned it. So,
but if I'm on my own, I still take a flask and sandwiches.
Oh no, that's it. Yeah, it's ingrained. Yeah.
When I go out in the car, I always take reserve rations, because I always, of course, there are always cafes and places you can go, but during COVID, it's been more difficult to do that. So I'm a great believer. This is something I would say to anybody watching it that might be young, starting out, is I'm a great believer in the power of two. I always think that you have reserves in sports teams for a reason. I always like to have a reserve position. So in property, one of the things I found very, very important is always to have a reserve position. So, if it goes wrong, what's the bottom line? What would it be a terminal hiccup for you or your business? Would it just be a temporary hiccup for you or your business? It's so important.
Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. You're an absolute gentleman, and your story is fascinating. And thank you so much for providing all of that insight.
No problem, James. It's very good. Very good to see you anyway. And you look after yourself. Good luck with the business. And we'll talk to you maybe about doing some business with you.
Thanks for listening to the Edozo Property Podcast. To find out more about Edozo, please visit edozo.com or follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter. Links are in the show notes.